Okay, we're going to move to our last topic of the day. I want to clarify this is not on for action. This is for discussion. So Governor Stevens has been ideating for a long time on these ideas. And so he has three proposals to discuss with the board. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So when the Board of Governors took up the idea, well, no, let me back up because not everybody may know this. Prior to bylaw amendments that were done a few years back, the at-large governors were elected by the Board of Governors. And a proposal came back that said, you know, the people should actually do that election. And so we passed the bylaw that the two at-large governors would actually be elected by the entire membership. The two at-large, I say diversity governors, I'm just going to short term that. And the young lawyer at-large governor would be elected by all of the at-large, by all of the young lawyer members. And then a couple of other things were done. One was to refer the at-large diversity candidates to the diversity committee, now the DEI council, who would, if there were more than three, would basically whittle down and recommend that three out of, if you had six or whatever, would go forward. When it passed, and you're right, and I'm glad you reminded me of how long I've been ruminating on this, because I asked the question, so how is it that all of the governors in one way or the other, but especially the at-large, would be elected by the entire membership, but the president or the president-elect, who will eventually become the spokesperson for the membership, are elected by 14 people with no say by the rest of the membership? And for me, that just didn't make sense. It didn't feel right. And so I started ruminating about that. And so I want to have the conversation, and I want all of you to know that I'm going to be listening, really actively, and hopefully we may even have other individual discussions about this. But I thought, that there needs to be a change. But I also recognized that there were issues to be dealt with, and one of the things that I did not want to see was a situation where, I don't know, I call them the telephone book firms, could flood the membership with campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've thought about how we've actually managed to limit the communications in some ways for the at-larges. But in any case, I also thought, well, suppose you had 6 candidates running for president-elect, or 4, or however many. What input should the membership, before they vote, get from the Board of Governors? And so I've thought about that. I haven't, come to a conclusion yet on that. But I thought, either you could have the same thing by the Board of Governors that you do with, for example, the DEI Council. So if you had 6, you could whittle it down to 3. But I also recognize there were times when we had candidates who, even from my point of view, were woefully lacking almost any knowledge about what happens with the Board of Governors. And, I either had an antipathy to the whole thing, and I thought, well, that would be strange. or really didn't actually even understand. So, questions about whether somebody had a point of view that was on the left or the right of the quote political spectrum, and I didn't understand where they were coming from. What do they mean by the left or the right? But I still have this at least nagging piece that while we have 2 governors elected by all the members, the president is just elected by 14 people. That just doesn't seem right. So that's why I decided before I get off of this thing, I'd at least make a run at making that change. Now, I appreciate also President Clark's memo. And I didn't remember, President Clark, I didn't remember anything about some study group or entity. Didn't have to though, because as you mentioned in your comments, for whatever reason, that never happened. That never took place. So I'm also of the mind that according to the conversation, and a number of you know me well enough to know that there are times I might have what I think is the greatest idea since sliced bread. I hear from you all and I say to myself, well, I can count, so I don't know why I'm going to go through this nonsense of having an actual vote. But I would like to have a discussion about that, and whether or not, and I'd like that discussion as I ponder bringing to you probably in June a proposed bylaw amendment on the election of the president-elect. But I would like to hear some feedback. I would like to, because I know the devil in the details, but I would like to also hear just the notion of the principle. Should it just be us who votes on the president, or should somehow or another the membership actually have a say?
Thanks, Alex. Why don't we take? Is that okay?
Well, okay, although I don't think they're all the same.
No, they aren't, but
Okay, okay,
there's hands up, so I figured probably taking it that way.
okay.
So let's hear first. Excuse me. Okay, so let's hear first. Some of you may not know, there is somebody here on Zoom who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, that has attended more of these meetings, I think, than any of us here have, and that'd be Jim McPherson. So let's hear from Jim. And thank you, Jim, so much for being here, sir.
I'm glad you let me speak first, Dan, because exactly 20 years ago, I headed a task force on this topic. And it was I was appointed by Dan Savage to look into the election of the president, as well as, let me lower my hand here, as well as the governors, because back in those days, there was an informal governor rotation that occurred between various counties. Those of you who are older will remember that, in the middle part of the state, and also some in the western part. And it was becoming a little frustrating to have governors come off of the board into the presidency. We had a number of them that occurred, and I actually have a list I'd be happy to share with those who were not or who don't have the memory of it or weren't here. And my task force ran from 03, and it kept getting bogged down, and it went into 04, went into 05, and I'll be honest with you, I had to go into my back office and find an old computer that had stuff from 20 years on it, 20 years ago. And I pulled it out. I've got it on this little new computer. And I'd be happy to share the stuff that we did 20 years ago. But rather than go into the details of what we did, I'll give you my thoughts currently, particularly since Alec asked the question. And I've struggled with this as well, and based upon some of the comments that you already made. And frankly, I came down to staying with our current system, and let me explain why. one of the things that we, and I could even share a screen and show you what we had talking points for. Let me see what it said here. It says talking points for the September 16, 2004 BOG meeting. So just 19 years ago. And one of the things in that is that the membership doesn't understand how the president is elected and why the president is elected. And I will take a little bit of umbrage of the comment, Alec, that he or she represents the bar. I think that the president represents the BOG, which is representing of the bar. And the purpose in my mind has always been, in the 20 more than, well, obviously must be 25 years now that I've been attending, is that the president asks, as the moderator, the mediator keeps things moving, makes sure issues come up. Rarely have we had presidents that just seize the bar and try to make it their own. The best presidents have always been those that create a symbiotic ability of a group to make decisions that everybody gets input on and feels good about, or equally bad about. I don't care how you do it, but for that reason, one of the main things you do, and the reason we also talked about the fact that we have a single candidates, which happened this year again. And there's lots of reasons why that happens over the years. But the main reason in my mind, personally, just amongst us folks here, is that there are certain people who just seem to have this consensus of this is somebody that we can all get along with and get things done with. And sometimes you have 2 or 3 people that fill that role. And I think that let me finish with this comment. I'll let others comment, but I'd be happy to talk individually or group again about this, is that the membership needs to understand that's what's going on, is that we're trying to find a person who can be on the board of governors day to day, work with the staff, work with and has knowledge of the BOG. Now, I can tell you all the politics that happened at the end of my task force, because those who feel like a task force is always just rubber stamped weren't there to see mine go down in flames. And I can tell you why it went down in flames, and they didn't adopt anything that we did over many years. But one of the things that we asked for, I did at that time, was please let people know how we do this and why we do it, so that they'll understand that if they come to these meetings, they'll see what happens. And you need somebody that can make the meeting work. And remember, I was there 4 years ago, Dan, when you became president, and I rarely speak, and I did at that time, and I said Dan needs to be president, and I've done that several times over the last 25 years that I've done this. But the reason is because I sense it around the whole table. I got to say, since I'm not there, I can say things that other people can't say. Okay, and I'll end with this. I think that the WSBA is best ruled by a group of people, not a person. And the way you get that is by working with people over the years, developing relationships, developing internal knowledge, and ultimately sitting in the chair. Now, Jan Eric Peterson was an unusual person who came back after 4 years because he stayed in contact and was immediately put in as president, because he showed up that day and told us all, hey, I'm ready. And we said, woohoo, we got him. But it doesn't always happen that way. Normally, it's somebody that comes off the BOG, and I think it should stay that way. So those are my personal comments. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that would like to talk to me about what happened 20 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jim. And yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, let's go next to Sanita, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I am glad that Jim McPherson went before me, because he said everything that I agree with. And so now I don't have a lot to say. I do think that given that the role of the president is for 1 year only, I mean, let's be real, we're like butterflies. We fly in, we fly out. And it would be very complicated to have somebody come in on a statewide election who was not familiar with the board and the committees and the councils and win the so-called popular vote of the members. I just think it would unnecessarily complicate things. And I don't think it would be a smooth way to get a president, especially when our terms are so short. So for those reasons, with all due respect, Governor Stevens, I rarely disagree with you, but I am doing so right now.
Thank you, Sunita. Okay, next, Kevin, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I may have told some or all of you before, I am a corporate governance geek. I was treasurer of the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals for the Washington chapter for many years. The problem we have here is that the president is misnamed. The president is not the chief officer. In fact, the president really isn't an officer. The chief officer of this organization is Tara. The proper term for what we call the chairman, what we call a president is chairperson. They're the chair of the board. And it's the board that ought to elect them, like every public company that seems to work well there. So I'm not suggesting that we change the term in the bylaws, although I think that would make it a lot clearer to people. But the president doesn't preside over the organization. They're not really the CEO. They're just the chairman of the BOG. And because they're the chairman of the BOG, it's the BOG that should pick who that person is. You know, that's how large organizations are run. So for those reasons, you know, I think it works pretty good the way it is now, although the terminology is a little confusing. And that's all I have to say about that.
I move to rename the president to Butterfly.
That's brother Price.
Yes.
All right. Jim and Sunita said a lot of what I was going to say, but I did want to add one thing. How's that? Sorry. I didn't even know my audio was on. All right, sorry. Okay, so Jim and Sunita said a lot of what I wanted to say. And actually, Kevin made me think about, to me, part of it is what role do you expect the president to play? If you see the president as sort of a balancing power to the board, then I think that could make more sense. But if you really see the president as the facilitator of the board and that partnership is key, which I think is part of what Kevin was saying and probably how I think we see it, then I think it does make sense for the board to elect. And the one thing I wanted to share is if you were to move forward to answer some of the questions in the memo, I think it would be so important to have criteria and so important to have a rating from the board. You know, the last at-large election, the voter turnout was less than 7%. We just have a very, very low engagement with our elections. And so I think it would be critically important that we, you know, set some criteria for who is eligible to run and then really think about how we educate our members about what they're voting on.
Thank you, Tara. Okay, so next, you know, for Nancy, but before I do, one of the things that I would just really add in, regardless of the vote, to switch or not, is to me one of the critical key roles of the presidency is to listen to the BOG. I've been on boards where the president dictated what the board would do or tried to, and that does not work. At least that didn't work. And so I would say that piece one. Piece two, I would say it is imperative whoever is in the presidency seat that they work respectfully and work, with you, Tara. And I think that is paramount. So, yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, Nancy, okay, Nancy next. Thank you.
Well, it's been a long day and I haven't spoken yet, so I figured I'd better earn my pay. Oh, wait, it's an unpaid position. The board chair or president, whatever it's called or going to be called, needs to be someone that the rest of the governors can look up to and respect. And they can't do that if the person who's elected is someone they don't know. And I think about the people that might run just because of some misconception of something the BOG is doing or some position the association has taken, and sort of runs on with some sort of axe to grind and to have an agenda. And what we can't function with is a chair that's going to chair with an axe to grind or a motive. They have to be the facilitator. They have to keep their opinions for the most part to themselves. And we've been through years where presidents were very opinionated and it came through in how they chaired meetings, whether motions weren't allowed or whether people weren't allowed to speak or, all sorts of things like that. So I agree that the Bar Association is a very complicated organization with a lot of moving parts. And it's hard enough when we see new governors come in who don't know those moving parts. If it's the chair, well, that's going to be kind of a really difficult year. And, I usually agree with Alec as well. And so I feeling a little pang about this, but it isn't that the membership doesn't have a say in this decision. They do, because the people around the table are representative of their districts. So when they get elected, then the membership is trusting them to make difficult decisions, including who the next president should be. So my section has not considered this issue and discussed it. This is my opinion.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Sorry, the mic was funky there. Okay. Alec.
Well, what I said in the beginning was I do know how to count. I appreciate, though, the time, because at least one of the things I noted, and I want to thank Jim McPherson, that at least I have met the, I don't know, 2-decade gap between asking the question about whether we do this or not. So I will not be moving forward with a bylaw change. And I appreciate the comments. And if you recall, I mentioned a candidate talking about the left and the right. Well, to the extent that you don't always see eye to eye, or some people don't always see eye to eye with my dear friend Nancy, but I seem to have struck a peculiar unity against my proposal. And so I will not be advancing that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. Do we want to move to okay, your second one? No?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the second one, again, I'd like to hear what people think. And I was speaking a lot with Julie Shanklin. One of the things that I have a real hard time about is people who are very diligent about doing the work, especially on committees, only to take time out of their schedule, show up, and then just have to go away because there's no quorum. And nothing is done, and time is lost. And so, I've just been trying to figure out how committees in particular can do the work that needs to be done, or even the prep work, where they don't run into that snag. And I don't have the details yet cobbled out, but basically the idea would be, and it was an idea that General Counsel suggested, which would be that at the front end of whatever work of a committee, when it does have a quorum, they can assign a work group that would then just work on the issue and the items, so that you're not just losing time. But I think it's problematic that either both our committees, luckily it's not always our committees, but other committees and other councils where we're working so hard to try to get volunteers, and the volunteers that step forward, there are some people, unfortunately, who volunteer and take their volunteer effort very seriously. And then there are some people, unfortunately, who like to collect resume ticks, but really don't see the importance of showing up. And so meetings don't happen, and meetings get postponed. And I even hear about some meetings where it happens more than once.
Yep.
And time is fleeting. So I just wanted to have some comments or some, from the rest of you about that one.
This is a big problem, and thank you for identifying it. I want to say this is a big problem, and as a committee chair, many of you that are committee chairs here have had to get on your phone texting and trying to get as many members into the meetings as possible so we can have excuse my French, so we can have a quorum. So I actually think if we have consensus today that this is something that we should actually proceed to do right away, if it's possible, because I just don't think it is right for those who are diligent, who are really committed, to be there and then nothing gets done. You just wasted the entire hour. Sometimes the meeting is set for 3 hours. You block that out of your calendar because you really wanted to be in that meeting, and you are there. There is no quorum, and that's all wasted. And I actually don't blame resume seeking people as the only people. There is also part of us that have other engagements that just can't stop. Sometimes it's due to valid reasons and excuses on why people are not able to make it. So I would concede that, but in the event that there is no quorum at the beginning, I think we should be able to have discussion. I really like this proposal, and I hope we can get a consensus around it. If we have to wait till June, that's okay. But if we can make this move today too, I wouldn't mind, because of the frustration I've had to deal with working on committees and chairing committees where we couldn't get people into the meeting.
Yeah, Mr. President, just to answer his question, this would be a bylaw amendment, because right now we have specific language regarding quorums that go across the board, not just with the Board of Governors, but on all of our councils count. So this would be coming, if I did, it would be coming for first read in, at the next meeting or whenever, and then second read because it's a bylaw amendment.
Thank you. It's a great point, Alec. Thank you for raising that. Okay, let's go next to Nam, please.
Right. I actually encountered this problem in my other boards also, where people and this actually I think there's 2 or 3 procedural or bylaw solution to it. One is one is basically say that once you have quorum, you don't lose quorum for the remainder of the meeting. Now that doesn't help in any way of getting quorum in the first place. But one thing that does help getting quorum is to shrink the number of amount of people in a committee. Because especially on the bar, because as a bar member, this is a 2-day meeting, but we also have membership in a lot of other committees. And I think we can scale that back a little where a committee or a council would have 10 members or 5 members. It would line the load for each member or each of us as governor. At the same time, with less people in the committee, I think it's actually helpful to get more quorum. I know some people are interested in a lot of committees and a lot of things in the bar activity, but I think prioritizing what's most important to you, what committee is most important to you, it's actually more helpful, and it actually will alleviate the rush to get quorum at the beginning of every meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to jump the line and go next to Julie because I think she may be helpful on this. So thank you, Julie.
Yeah. So, just a couple of things. So, part of what Governor Stevens and I have been discussing is, so what is it that people want to do without a quorum? What is important to do without a quorum? What is probably not a good idea to do without a quorum, right? So some committees, when they meet and they have a quorum, they then say, person A and person B, it is your job to go work between meetings, go do work, go figure out stuff and bring it back to the committee. So part of what we've been talking about is some of this may be a workflow issue, right? If you can assign work to people, people can certainly do work between meetings, and that doesn't need a quorum. So what do you need a quorum for? Why do the bylaws have this stuff in it anyway? And I think part of it is because you're the board for a lot of lawyers in the state of Washington, and they may like to see your conversation. They may like to know when it's happening. They may like to know what information you considered in making decisions. And so I think that probably underlies why, well, that, and because the definition in the bylaws looks a lot like the laws for other agencies that may or may not apply to us, but it's the same definition. You include discussions, you include gathering information in your definition of what it means to take action, and so therefore what you would do in a meeting. So I would just encourage you to talk about, when you're having these problems of setting quorums, what's the purpose of the meeting, right? A quorum, I think you already have in your bylaws, you need a quorum to take action. I suppose you could change that because action now includes almost everything. But I want you to talk about, I think, or I would encourage you to talk about, is there a way to make it clear that you need quorum when, for example, it's important for members to be able to give input, right? Because that's part of what is happening. Members want to watch what you're doing. That's sort of part of the Open Public Meetings Act, right? That's why you do that, so that people can see what you're doing. But I don't know that there's any expectation for people to see all of the work. So long as you're doing work and then you're bringing it back to the group to have the decision-making piece, and there's a way for people to see what that is, right? So part of the issue may be the way the workflow is happening.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, Kevin.
I was confused over this. So I looked at the bylaws. There is a quorum requirement for the BOG Legislative Committee. There is not a quorum requirement for any other committee. The quorum requirement is in C4CD. I'm sorry, C4D, which pertains only to the BOG Legislative Committee. It's silent otherwise. It's just a meeting. And people operate the meeting by consensus. That's what folks want. There's no change needed because there is no quorum requirement for committees that are not the Legislative Committee.
Julie, would you agree with that as our counsel? Just so
No,
we're
no,
clear?
I
Okay.
wouldn't.
Sorry, Kevin.
Where is
So-
it written, Julie? Where is
That's,
it written?
that's an interesting tone to take. Why don't you give me just a moment to answer your question? Just calm down. So there's a lot in the bylaws, and I really don't appreciate the way this is happening right now. But there is a definition of quorum. It also says that Robert's rules applies to BOG meetings, right? And I will go and pull out all of the places where you need to look, but I can't do it on the spur of the moment. If you'll give me a few minutes, I will pull together an answer for you.
And that's my fault. I'm sorry, Julie, as chair, that's not fair for you. And I definitely very much appreciate you, and we all do. So thank you. And
No,
certainly-
it's fine. I just need to pull it all together so that it's clear what it is we're talking about. Thanks.
Oh, certainly. Man, this thing's some work. Okay, yes, certainly. And I think we can all agree. I mean, historically, there's several places in our bylaws that aren't super clear, so that they probably do need to be rewritten on certain things. So, but okay, let's go next to Nam.
Well, regardless of whether it's in the bylaw or not, that does raise the question of whether we want to get rid of the quorum requirement throughout. And I don't actually think that's a good idea, because we could have a situation where only Dan shows up and then he can make all the decisions. So it's not, or like, just like a fair and fair or something like, yeah. So there's a reason why we have the quorum requirement. I know, even if it's just for the legislature, even if we can't find it anywhere, I think we should put one in. In any case, it should be 50% plus one. We could make it 50%. I prefer 50% actually.
And thank you. Okay, hand up by Alec.
So we've gone back and forth a bit, and I guess one of the things that I am thinking that we could do, and I'll need to have more working meetings with general counsel. But one of the things that does kind of strike me is I don't know that the term action should be as all encompassing as it is. So another view I have is that a committee could actually discuss and could actually hear from people before it actually finalizes its work, completes it, and then votes, which would be the action that I would have, to pass that out of committee to come to the Board of Governors. And that's one of the areas, but I'm just looking at what to do, because I mean, one of the things that General Counsel and I both agree on, which also is problematic, is a committee meets, explains what it's going to be taking up or considering, and people show up for the meeting. And then you say, well, sorry, no meeting today. I mean, again, for the members who show up, not members of the committee, but members who show up, they are not happy campers, I can tell you, because they're ready to engage. Another thing is, well, if they showed up, could they at least submit whatever their comments were for the committee to consider and accept those and consider those as they're finalizing the work. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to work on to get us out of, I think, this bind where You know, the people with due diligence, they've shown up, members of our members or the public show up and wanting to speak to us about something, and we kind of say, well, no, go away. I'd rather not do that. So
Thanks, Alec. Julie had her hand up, but now it's down. I think the comment in chat makes a lot of sense about we table this until tomorrow. If you need more time, Julie, I will again say I am sorry for putting you on the spot. That was my bad. So with that, but
So it's fine. So I can answer it mostly, but the bylaws and Robert's rules interact, and that's the piece that I was going to go and just make sure that I had it sorted out. But most of the information, so in the very beginning of the bylaws, if you look on page 3 of the current bylaws in the definitions section, so 2E, it defines quorum. And then you have to go to the meetings section. So that's 7A, and it talks about meetings, and then B as well, talking about all the meetings of the BOG and other entities must be open to the public, etc. And it talks about how the meetings occur. It defines a meeting to be a meeting, which is unfortunate, but that is, and I know a meeting is defined as a meeting where action is contemplated. So then you move down to the definition of action, and that is the transaction of business, right? Which includes the giant list that Alec was just talking about, which is potentially part of the problem. And then you go to final action, and it says collective positive or negative consensus or an actual vote of the voting members present. So Governor Fay, I understand that it's not super clear, and there's a separate part that says that Robert's rules apply to BOG meetings, right? And you can get there in the BOG meetings too. But you know, an actual vote of the voting members present, you know, you need a quorum when you're going to have a vote, right? How else are you going to have a vote? And so that is how you get there. And that definition applies to all meetings. And so, well, I'm sorry that you disagree. I don't know what you're disagreeing with exactly. So maybe we can talk offline about what your disagreement is.
suggest that. I mean, for time's sake, Alec, what I can kind of count and read the room too, and I would suggest you move this one forward for further discussion in June.
And Mr. President, if I could also, because I just want to say this to make sure, I absolutely appreciate working with General Counsel on this. And we've gone back and forth, and we'll continue to do that, but in a way that works for both of us and to give you all the better product. There's some things that came out of this discussion, by the way. I mean, so the main area may be about this whole issue of what happens if you don't have a quorum, but things like defining a meeting as a meeting, is also stuff. So this will be an effort to hopefully clean up, and it'll either come in June or it'll come in August for first read, according to how much time it is.
So you're batting 1 for 2.
That's okay.
If we look at it like, baseball, you're an all-star.
No kidding. Okay.
If you look at it like, I mean, say, what are those things called, for basketball, free throws. Okay, you're Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So the next one, let's stick with baseball, because
all right.
If I'm 1 for 3, I mean, that's still like 375, which is quite a hitter anyway. So the third one, and again, Mr. President, I appreciate your analysis, although I'm going to go back and take a look at this. It is my experience, and so I'm going to go back and look at all of the meetings. Here's the thing. I felt there was a change that was made, and some of it may have been especially because of the impact of COVID. But when I came onto this board, my recollection was about half of our meetings were in Seattle and the other half were around the state. And I am raising this as a policy because actually starting with last year, I think maybe 2 of our meetings were in Seattle. Although I have to remember that we had a number of ethos meetings. So, but this year, and it's, I want to say this, and I say this with a grin because I'm not sure you take it this way, because I meant no disrespect to you, Mr. President. But when I saw that we only had 1 meeting in Seattle, I kind of went, wait a minute, something has totally shifted. And my concern is that one, and I guess we'll have a different discussion anyway about the status of our home, but our home currently has a fully functioning conference center where Rex doesn't have to carry this movable feast all around. And I just absolutely believe that at least approaching half of the meetings, we should use our own stuff. But I also considered, and one of the reasons, I was just giving an outline, is that President-elect Abel also has begun to talk about us showing up at law schools. And so I thought, well, to try to balance this, maybe I wouldn't say, well, as a policy, half of our meetings will be in Seattle, but a third would be in Seattle, King County, 2 would be in our home, and 1 would be an option as we move around. And I appreciate moving around. Also, the context for me is interesting because we do move around, but things are different now. I mean, to me, one of the benefits of COVID is Zoom. Because for those of you who may not have been around prior to Zoom, we had I don't know what you'd call this thing, the octopus or the squawk box.
Star phone, which
in
is
the middle of the table. And I mean, if you weren't physically present, I mean, it was a totally disjointed experience. We didn't know who was on the phone until Rex told us who was on the phone, and all those things. But now actually we really can have, and I like having hybrid. So, I see the benefit of us moving around in any case, but I do think there should be some standard in terms of how often we are at least at our home with our facility. And I think 1 is too few.
Thank you, Alec. Okay, I see the hand up first by Francis.
This one is a
And George.
little, oh, okay. This one is a little interesting. We just had a presentation from 2 judges and a criminal defense attorney, a public defender, and a civil legal aid attorney, a civil legal attorney. And their comments at the end of their presentation is that we want to thank you that you come here today. It means a lot to them that you will leave your home, as to use Alec language, to come to us means that you are putting priorities on the issues that affect us. I think that should resonate in us. And we had the same issue when we were in Spokane last year. And the comments from everyone that came into our meeting was Board of Governors cares. That is not about Seattle. Now, I do understand. I get this clear. Majority of our members are in Seattle. There is no doubt about that. And we should always cater to them. And we do. Most of the issues that come before this board are, to be very fair, are most favorably for Seattle attorneys to be able to do their work better. Rarely do we have the kind of crisis we have now with legal deserts. But I just wanted to say, I'm talking about President-elect Abel. This will be in the history of the association the first time that the Board of Governors will be going outside of Spokane, from Benton County and Seattle. We will be going to Stevens County. That county suffers. We talk about the crisis in this area. You need to hear people talk about the challenges they face in the legal realm in that area. So I think giving the president the benefit of being able to, because President Abel has been touring around the states and airing what is going on all over the state. For him to be able to say, look, I think we need to be at this place means a lot. I think that's one of the things we should cede to the president to be able to do. I don't think we should take that away from them. Now, cost is always very important to me as treasurer. When we are in Seattle, the bill we get is less compared to when we are outside of Seattle. But can you put price, can you put cost on that presentation today? How engaged, how important that this meeting is to the bar and the bench in Yakima? Just quantify that in terms of money. It just make a world of difference to them, that the Board of Governors would deem it fit to look at the particular issues that they are facing and you are willing to come. And I tell you, if we have this meeting in Seattle, majority of the people that we met with on Thursday, on Friday, and tomorrow will not be able to come. So I just wanted to say that for us to think about it, whether it's one meeting we have in Seattle or whether we have 5 meetings in Seattle, I want to give the president the discretion to be able to do that, to pick those meeting spots. I think it's the right thing to do. If we want to say, you please do this, remembering that cost is important to us, we can do that. I'm willing to live with that, but I just think that this organization is doing the right thing by having meetings outside of Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I'm going to go next to Jordan, and okay, then Tara, then Hunter, then Todd.
I'll be brief. I'm surprisingly indifferent to this proposal. In that really, I think this, laws, I think when you write them down are for the future, are for, what's going on, and I need to account for things that may change later on. And to me, this, is, I enjoy traveling. I enjoy being in Seattle. I can bike to the office. But it seems like this is one of the things we want, and we as a board kind of decide that we're the board that wants this. We should tell Hunter this and communicate that with him and with Sunitha. And that's kind of the route for this, because there might be another board that, 2 years from now that says, we really want to be able to go out and see people more often. And then you're not going to want to have this bylaw in the book. And so I think this is a perfectly fine thing to value. I think, using our Seattle office is a great idea while we still have it, at least. I like biking to these meetings. But I think that's where I am right now, and Hunter now knows that, Sunitha knows that, and I think that's kind of a better way to appropriate that, deal with this issue. Plus, the president has so little power. Let's give them this one little thing. Let them keep it.
Those are wise comments about the President Butterfly should have more power. So get Tara next.
Well, I have so many thoughts about this, but it's really complicated. I think sometimes we go and have these meetings locally, and it's really impactful, and it's really engaging, and it's really moving. And other times we go and have these meetings, and that's not necessarily the experience. And I have gotten mixed feedback from members over the years about whether they value us bringing the road show in. And I remember one in particular, a listening tour, and we got some negative feedback about it. Now, I don't think that should drive, but I also just want to say, I think there's a lot of ways for us to get out there without bringing the board meeting. And usually nobody locally attends the board meeting. Now they do attend the lunch and they do attend the things, but they're not at the board meeting typically. And I loved that President Clark thought to invite them in to present to us, because I think that was meaningful. So I guess one thing I would say is, if we're going to do it, let's make sure it's meaningful. And don't forget that there's lots of other ways. And I think showing up at local bar association events is often even more meaningful than inviting them to come to our thing. The other thing I want to say, and I'm actually extremely sympathetic to Jordan's joke about, like, let's give the president something. And yet I'm going to say something a little contrary to that, which is that having a completely different approach every year, I have learned, is more challenging than I realized. We did have a long-standing sort of practice. It wasn't a rule, but it was just sort of the custom prior to the pandemic that we would have 3 meetings in Seattle at the office and 3 meetings outside. And then we had the pandemic, and then after that, we really sort of ramped up the travel. And we have really struggled with having capacity to do that. It's not just the cost, it's the amount of work that goes into finding a suitable venue, finding a suitable hotel, finding the restaurants, contracting with all of that. And you may end up seeing in the budget this year a request for another FTE to help with that, because it makes a big difference that I did not fully anticipate until I had sort of been through this for a few years. So I just want to say, even though I do agree the president should get to make some decisions, it is also hard to really shift that expectation year after year. There was one, and then the other thing I wanted to say is, whatever you're thinking right now about this, I ask you to take that into the conversation about the WSBA space. Because in my opinion, if you're going to invest in a space, you should use it. And if you're not going to use it in that way, then think about that as you're making decisions about the space.
Okay, well. So embarrassing on my part with this, but okay, let's go next to Hunter, and I will stay away from the mic.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. A few thoughts, and I'll just go in order here. First of all, I appreciate Alex's comment about our home is important. That's something I've been thinking about as well. I think there's a lack of familiarity with our spaces, and that plays a role in our discussions about what we're going to do going forward. So I've been thinking about that. I too have a desire to get back there. One of the things I would say about this is that as I went about looking at planning the meetings for this next year, I viewed it as an opportunity to help communicate some of the values that I want to talk about in the course of the next year. It's not the only way to do that, but it's a way to do that, to show what's important. And that's going to change from year to year. That's one of the things that I think is completely appropriate to talk about with the incoming president-elect, of what are you going to emphasize? What is of importance to you? And I really look forward to hearing from Sunitha as she thinks about this and starts beginning to plan over the course of the next year, which, by the way, Shelley has already told me I am old news. She's moving on completely to Sunitha now. She's done with me. Let's see. So the third point was to Executive Director Nevitt's comment about that if we do go outside our spaces, and frankly, even if we stay inside our spaces, we need to be thinking about how do we meaningfully interact with the public. I'm honored if the public comes in and attends any of our meetings, but I think there might be better ways for us to meaningfully interact with the public, and going out within the community is a great way to do it. And then lastly, many of you may already know this, but just as a point of situational awareness, and this is neither to speak pro or against the proposal from Alec, but at least at this point, next year, we are looking tentatively at 6 meetings. That's one reduction from the number of meetings we've had this year. So these will be busy meetings. And the plan is to have them evenly divided between Western Washington and Eastern Washington. Specifically to Alex's proposal, there will be a difference. What I have put forward is 2 meetings to take place in Seattle, one at our WISBA headquarters, one at University of Washington School of Law, which I'm excited to be going to UW. Another meeting to take place in the fall with the court down in Olympia. The 3 meetings to take place east of the mountains, one in Spokane at Gonzaga University School of Law. So again, another opportunity to go talk to the newest members of our profession. One in the Tri-Cities and then one in Nespelem, which is personally meaningful to me. I think it's important. We've done some research on this. We've never met on a reservation. We've met on tribal trust land before, but never on a reservation. So I'm excited about this. I know our hosts are excited about it. So I think it's an opportunity for the president to help communicate the values that are important to them. Thank you. Oh, now it's doing it to me. So
All right,
yeah,
well,
Sunitha,
good.
come
I'm
fix
glad
the microphone.
I'm glad
None of
it
us
was-
can run it.
That's a bad joke, you know, how many of us
Yeah,
operate
yeah.
here, but I digress. Todd, next, please.
Thank you, President Clark. I think there's some really interesting comments here, particularly I like some of the comments that Executive Director Nevitt said with regards to engagement and ensuring that we've got meaningful engagement. I think that's, you know, clearly, you know, we looked at kind of when we were talking about the key performance indicators, some of our key principles or goals, if you will, and part of that's public and the member outreach and engagement. And you know, we might not have as much engagement during the business portion of our meetings. Maybe it's, you know, more of the kind of the presentations or awards types things, local hero event, for example, today. And you know, with the bar and the judiciary as well, the bench engagement, I think is meaningful in a sense that certainly you know, I think we could sense some of the impact we saw today here clearly. So and I think the other thing, though, as well, I mean, I think that finding a balance between utilizing our facilities. I mean, clearly, there's a lot of other things that we utilize those facilities for. A lot of CLEs, a lot of other types of meetings, a lot of task force, other type of utilization. Clearly, the staff uses spaces. You know, so although you know the cost of meetings and cost of travel is concerning, you know, there's always going to be somebody traveling one way or the other, right? Either east or west. We're going to have part of the board is going to be coming or going to the other geographic location. But I think it also allows us who are not, you know, particularly geographical representation, allows us to kind of see how the other, you know, the other part of the state, the part that we don't represent, you know, feel about particular issues and what it's like, you know, so to speak. It kind of goes back to this issue. Clearly, Zoom is a huge improvement over the old conference call, you know, bat phone or whatever, right? But you know, to the same token as some of the thoughts that have been expressed earlier, it's not the same as being able to get together and sit down over dinner or have a drink or something after the event or during the event. And that kind of just, you know, rubbing elbows in the passageway or whatever, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of benefit. And I think in having some geographic distribution is important. You know, it's important that we get the value, utilize our facilities. But by the same token, I think, you know, there are competing interests, and I think having some travel schedule makes sense, clearly. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Nam next, and then Alec last word.
How I'm going to propose a compromise. We have 6 meetings a year. Let's have 2 at headquarters. We're always going to have a meeting in Olympia with the court. We're always going to go to Spokane, and the last 2 will be the president's choice. I think that makes sense for everybody. So it will utilize our space, and it will allow the president to have some choice whether he could choose to go to anywhere in the state he wants, and we don't complain. Now, we ever want to have a 7 meeting, let's have that online. So I think 6 meetings at 2 of them, 4 of them are set location every year, and 2 of them are the president's choice. I think that's a good way to do it.
Thanks, Nam.
Yeah.
One thing I would add though is typically every year we don't go to Spokane, but I personally like that idea. But
Hey,
well, every year you've been.
let's not go there.
No, but as, yeah.
Please, we have to go to Spokane.
So all right, Alec.
Just
Wait, though, you made a motion, or is that a?
no, just
Okay,
no.
sorry.
One, because I'm not bringing. This is not for action. This is just discussion. But I wanted everybody to know, and and you said it, Jordan, so I want to be clear. This is not a bylaw. Okay? This is, I would not want to have in the bylaws, so you'd have to have some, I mean, real weird effort to then change it if you need it. This would be a policy.
Okay.
And so, and if it
says it in bylaw.
it's okay, or policy, but what I meant was it's a policy. And so, but I appreciate everybody's comments, and I'll tinker with this a little bit, but you know, when I bring it back, and I will bring this one back, so I don't know what that does for my batting average, whether it's 375 or 500, but I will be bringing this one back for us to vote her up or down. It won't have first or second reading, but you know, I'm probably not going to rush to do this in June. And I also, just so you know, Mr. President-elect, I'm not going to try to do this to have a policy while you're planning. So this would be in force if I succeed, and will in some ways constrain President-elect Angeville and those forward. Thank you all very much for actually having this conversation. And I hope I didn't waste your time. I thought these were important. Oh, Nancy.
Nancy, please.
Thanks. I guess so. I have several comments. First, any ideas, as I understand them, are supposed to have both a fiscal and a DEI impact analysis. And the fiscal analysis, in my mind, just off the top of my head, is that it's cheaper to do them all at the office. So somewhere along the way, the numbers of what it costs to go to different places should be put together and presented. With regard to DEI, let's think about it. Are we asking our low-income members, our disabled members, to take, 3-4 days off of work, leave their kids God knows where if they're single parents, travel on their own dime? So I'm talking from a member point of view. Obviously, the governors eat some of their expenses, but for the most part get reimbursed. But from a member point of view, ordinary members can't afford that. There's a cost to missing work, getting daycare, traveling, paying for a hotel, and to attend, to give you all their point of view. And as Tara said, there are other ways to get people's point of view. The listening tours, I attended a couple, and we've heard her reports, were an excellent way to get information, sometimes unpleasant information, but we got it, and we didn't need to sit in the back of a room or have a bunch of people in suits sit around the table and invite people to come and give that input. We go to them the same way that if you expect the minority bar associations to come to us, or it's their own fault because we didn't learn what they wanted. No, we should go to their events. We should hear, take on the burden of learning information. Somebody talked about suitable locations for the Board of Governor meetings. Well, what's suitable? So suitable seemed to be where we would get some input. Well, it seems to me an awful lot of meetings happen at resorts. Whatever the name of the place is down. Clearwater's not, anyway, Clearwater one of my favorite places, but I wouldn't recommend that you be there. The place down by Vancouver, Skamania. Oh, for God's sakes, and the place up in Bellingham. Really, is that the image that you want people to have of a fiscally responsible bar association? It can't be. Not if anybody ever wants to ask for a fee increase of $5 or $10, let alone $100 for a member wellness or whatever. The Board of Governors does not need to meet in waterfront resorts in order to do its business. While I like the idea of appearing at law schools and meeting the young and impressionable law students that we all once were, think about some of the debates, if you can call them debates. Some of these meetings are pretty darn boring. And they aren't about how we can solve the problems of a law student. That, think about whether they're going to be impressed by having the Board of Governors in front of them or not. And I worry that it will not help. Not unless we really focus the entire meeting on things that improve their lives. In the long run, it's really all about money and the perception of money. And we're already thought of as an organization that is not by some people, as an organization that's being irresponsible with dues. And we have to be careful about how we spend our money and how visible it is. While I certainly understand the personal issue of wanting to go, Hunter, back to your roots for a meeting, I worry about the perception. Are we going to have a meeting where we expect a certain level of attendance, a certain level of accommodation, a certain level of food? Is it going to be there, or are we going to jump in, look like the legal professionals that we are, contrast with the local community, and then leave because they don't have anything as fancy as Semiahmoo or even the Hilton Garden Inn, on the reservation? I've not been to that reservation. I've been to plenty of reservations, and generally speaking, the accommodations are not Semiahmoo or whatever. So our image matters, our input matters, but feeling like we're welcoming information also matters. So I think we should be very careful and thoughtful about where we go and what we do. And that includes where the meetings are.
Thank you, Nancy. One thing I would add for you all, and certainly, okay, so Shelley can pipe in. There are materially different costs for where we meet at, and some of them are what she referred to as like super venue sites as far as expenses, right, Tara? And so we tried to very limit and not do those. And like, for example, for some reason, that one we went to, Skamania, is very expensive. Right. Yeah, as opposed to, and so yeah, just with that, but so.
Just Just one other thing, because it was. Sorry. One other thing, because I made the comment about suitability. Mostly what I'm talking about is we need a room of a certain size with a hardwired internet with like all these things. So that's usually, and it has to be ADA accessible. And so that's really what I'm mostly talking about. And yeah, certainly, you know, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, well.
And
Others.
I just want to thank you all for having this conversation. I've been talking about this with leadership since it started about 2 years ago. The workload has increased a lot, which is great. And it's good to be out here around the state and showing our face. I mean, I was hired 17 years ago. I was told that is a part of the job. So thank you for the conversation. It's going in the direction I had hoped it would go. There are definitely certain requirements that need to be in place about venue selection we have technical requirements that are a must. And so thank you. I look forward to this conversation continuing.
Thank you, Rex. And to follow up on that, one place this year, like my top place I wanted to go for the year, we ultimately couldn't go because I wouldn't work for Rex. And my first day on the bog, we went to Alderbrook and 2017, but apparently they have AOL or so for, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and there's things happening around the state where all these facilities are trying to upgrade to be able to host these hybrid, very technical meetings, right? And so there's some spaces that can't do it yet, but they're in the works of doing it. And Alderbrook is one of them that is coming back on our list. So,
okay. Sarah.
Maybe this is a good point about technology. Again, Rex is being a little bit humble because it is a big job to take it on the road and he's gotten better at it. But we do have like a built-in place that literally it's so much better and more convenient for 99% of the people. Like Nancy said, if they actually want to watch the board meeting, my opinion is they get a much better show when we're actually at our headquarters. My portfolio is outreach. And we've also heard a lot of times, you know, when we come where you are with what you're doing, as opposed to you come here, that often seems a much more preferable way to do it. That being said, you all have a limited amount of time. This isn't your full-time job. You don't want to be out there doing it, but there's probably the right balance somewhere. I wanted to drop a little bit in there as well, which isn't in this motion in particular, but having a lot of interface with staff liaisons. I just want to mention Saturdays are super, super hard too. And so that if you're coming out to like meet with people and you're meeting here on Saturdays, we've just had very little luck getting people who are volunteering to want to come up and give that up. So just things to balance. How effective is traveling to talk to people versus what you could be somewhere else versus coming on their own time in their own place. So a lot of things. I don't want to take the butterflies power away, but I think there could be separate ways if you want to engage with the public and with members. I don't think your board meetings, I'm sorry, are the most exciting and best way that draws people out. So I think there's fringe benefits that we put on that we could do lots of ways.
Your comments are not well taken as far as exciting memories, but yes, but
I liked him.
So I do see Todd's hand up. Is that an old hand or is that?
Yeah, thank you. The only comment I remember hearing somebody reference post-COVID. And so, I mean, maybe what's appropriate now might not be appropriate a year or 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, just kind of throwing it out there because clearly, we're kind of coming out of a rather unusual period, and that, having that kind of presence might make a difference now, but it might not be as meaningful. And there may be some other things in the future as well that would drive or would potentially dictate or inform us that we want to be, more present to the rest of the state than just the Seattle contingent.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, so with that, I think we have our marching orders, and Alec, I think the math would be 6.67%, so 6.7%. So 2/3. Hey, that isn't bad. So Thank you so much. It's been a great day, I think. So thank you all. Hard work. We're having, I mean, awesome year. So thank you all, seriously. And adjourned.